Let us now look at the next topic, that is JDBC. JDBC is used for database connectivity. JDBC does not have any sort of extension. Java database connectivity is not an extension for JDBC. This is a concept of connecting to a database from a Java language. To connect to a database and to talk to the database, we have set of interfaces which we need to work with, that is available from java.sql package. So we need to import java.sql package. The architecture of JDBC is as follows. There is a driver manager layer and an application layer. If I want to talk to a database from a given language, there should be someone mediating between the language and the database. And this is nothing but your driver. So you need to load the driver. Loading of the driver occurs in the driver manager layer. Once the driver is loaded, then you talk to the driver to talk to the database. First of all, to talk to a database, you must have a username and password so that you can get the connection. So you need to get the connection first, and that occurs in the application layer. Once you have a connection, then you just have to issue the commands and execute the commands. So therefore, you need to create your statement, execute it, of course handle exceptions, and also process results that the execute has given you. So these are the step of execution, sequence of execution for your JDBC program as well. So what are all the types of drivers that are available, and how do you load the driver? There are 4 types of drivers available, that is type 1, 2, 3 and 4. Now it's not as simple as the name looks like. Type 1 driver is known as the JDBC ODBC driver, that's the JDBC ODBC bridge. Type 2 is the thick driver, or also known as the native driver. Type 3 is the net protocol driver. Type 4 is the thin or the pure driver. What happens in type 1 driver, that is JDBC ODBC driver, is that you have a Java API which talks to a native API, that is the ODBC driver, which then talks to a database. In case of a thick driver or the native driver, that is type 2, you have a native API which talks to a database. In case of a net protocol driver, that's type 3 driver, it's a 3-tier architecture. The client talks to a server through net protocol driver, and the server will use one of the other 3 drivers to talk to a database. So it's a 3-tier architecture in case of a type 3 driver. You would use type 3 driver in cases where there is a lot of concurrency to access to a database, lot of traffic that would be that would be there to access to a database. Type 4 driver is a pure or a thin driver where it is complete Java API which talks to the database. Most often used driver is the type 4 driver. To load the driver, we use the class for name method. For name is a method in class which returns a class object. To the for name method, you provide a string parameter that's nothing but the name of the class which you want to load. Not only can this be used to load a driver class, but it can also be used to load any class in general. When you use the for name method to load a class, you must specify the complete path of the class, that is the package name dot the class name. Let's assume that you want to use the type 1 driver, that's a JDBC ODBC driver. In that case, the path to JDBC ODBC driver class is sun.jdbc.odbc.jdbc driver. If you want to work with type 2 or type 4 driver, let's assume for Oracle database, then you would specify the string as oracle.jdbc.driver.oracle driver as a string. So using the class.forName, we load the driver class. By using the forName method to load the driver class, the difference is that I can dynamically provide the value for the driver class. When I say dynamically, through some variable, I can provide the name of the driver class to be loaded. If I were to create an instance of it, it becomes a static load. If I want to change the driver class, I would have to go and change it in the code then. So using class.forName, we load the driver. Once the driver has been loaded, you need to get the connection. So to fetch the connection is an interface in the SQL package. Almost all .class files in the SQL package are interfaces, unless and until I specify it's a class. So connection is an interface. Driver manager is a class which has a method called getConnection, which returns a connection object. To the getConnection method, in case of JDBC ODBC driver, you specify the string, that is the URL, the protocol JDBC, the main protocol is JDBC, the subprotocol is ODBC, colon, the DSN name. Since we are working with a JDBC ODBC driver, we need to talk to a ODBC call. We need to create a DSN, that is a data source name, for ODBC driver. So which means to say, in whichever machine that you're going to run your JDBC program in that machine you should have created a DSN, and that DSN must be referred here. Now what do you specify with the DSN? With the DSN you specify the database name to which the DSN refers to. You map it to a database. So whatever the DSN name is, you specify here. Let's call it as my DSN. How do you create a DSN? You go into settings, administrative tools, you get ODBC sources out there, click on that, you get a dialog box. depending on which database you want to connect to, you select the appropriate driver, ODBC driver from the list. You get the list when you click at add. Click at the add button when you get the dialog box. Once you click at the add button, it lists you all the ODBC drivers available. Select the ODBC driver for an appropriate database. It will ask you for a DSN name. Provide the DSN name and create it. So once you create a DSN name, use the DSN name out here. Followed by the DSN name is the username and password. This is the string for get connection in case you are working with JDBC ODBC driver class. If you were to work with the Oracle driver, remember we just said we want to use the Oracle driver so that you can connect to the database. Whether we want to use the thick driver or thin driver of Oracle, we have not yet specified. So how do you specify whether thick or thin driver? That is done in the get connection method. So in the get connection for Oracle driver, what you need to do is you specify the main protocol, that's JDBC. Subprotocol should be Oracle, followed by whether thick or thin driver. Thick driver comes in various versions depending on the version of the database, OCI 7, OCI 8, so on and so forth. That is Oracle Call Interface, that's what OCI stands for. So you can specify whether OCI 8 or whatever it is, followed by the host string, followed by the port number, and then the database instance. And then your username and password. If you want to work with a thin driver, then replace this with the word thin, so you would be using a thin driver of Oracle. Host string stands for the database server machine name. That is the machine name on which the database server is running. Port number by default for Oracle, if you have not changed during the installation of Oracle server, is 1521. And the default database instance that while installing, if you have installed, is ORCL, otherwise whatever the name that you specified during your installation for the database instance. Now the question would be, which driver can be used when, whether type 1, 2, 3 or 4. Now when you are writing an application program, you can use all the 4 types of drivers. But if you are writing an applet program, you must use the thin driver. Reason being, thin driver is written completely in Java. So when an applet runs a JDBC code, and if you are using a thin driver being a Java class, it loads the Java class to the client machine and opens a socket to the database to talk to the database. If an applet needs to use the JDBC ODBC driver or the thick driver, in case of JDBC ODBC driver, you need to create a DSN in the local client machine, so which means to say the applet needs to access the local machine. And in case of a thick driver, you need to have your OCI files, the DLL files, which the applet needs to access from the local machine again. So you cannot use for an applet type 1 or type 2 drivers unless an applet is a trusted applet, giving a permission to access the local machine for such use. That's why applets must use thin drivers. But anyway, it's not a good idea for applets to connect directly to the database. You must have an applet talk to a server-side program, and the server-side program should talk to a database and return back to the applet the information. So once you have a connection object, next thing is to create a statement. So to create a statement, you have three methods in the connection interface called create statement, prepare statement, and prepare call. Create statement returns a statement type of object. Prepared statement returns a prepared statement object. Prepare call returns a callable statement object. What is the difference between these three statements? As you can see, the way in which the statements are created itself, there is a difference. For create statement, there is no parameter, whereas for prepare statement and prepare call, there is a parameter string. And the string parameter is nothing but the query or the procedure or the function which you want to invoke. So which means to say that these two statements, the statements are pre-compiled and kept, and when you execute, it just needs to execute those statements. Whereas in case of create statement, the statement will be specified in the next step, that is during execution. So for every time you execute, the statement has to be compiled and executed, which is a performance issue. So create statement is used to execute static SQL statements. Prepare statement is used to execute static or dynamic SQL statements. Prepare call is used to execute the backend store or backend procedures and functions, or stored procedures and functions. What do I mean by static SQL statement and dynamic SQL statement? When I talk about static SQL statement, it means to say, for example, select star from employee where department is equal to edu. All values are given for the statement. It's a static SQL statement. A dynamic SQL statement is where you need to provide values at runtime for the statement. For example, select star from employee where department is equal to question mark. What is the value of the department would be provided later in time. That's a dynamic SQL statement. So the difference again between create statement and prepare statement when it comes to SQL statements is that prepare statement is used for both dynamic and static SQL statement. Not only that, with prepared statement, since we are providing the statement to the prepare statement method itself, the statement is pre-compiled and kept. It doesn't have to be compiled again and again when you execute it. So it is wise to use prepared statement whenever you want to execute a particular statement again and again, multiple times. If you're going to execute only once, you can use create statement, no hassle, because anyway, once the statement has to be compiled. So once you have a statement object, then using the statement object, you can call the execute methods. There are three types of execute methods. You have execute query, execute update, and execute method. Execute query returns a result set. Execute update returns int. Execute returns boolean. Of course, there is another version of each one of these execute methods, that is to take a string parameter. Execute query is used for select statements. Execute update is used for any DDL and DML statements like create, insert, update, delete, all these. Execute is in general used and moreover for your stored procedures and functions. And more so, execute is used when you have multiple results being returned. So let's look at each one of these more in detail. Now just before that, one more important point is that within any statement object, one statement object can only have one result set. If you try to open another result set in the same statement object, the previous result set gets closed. So if you have a requirement at any point that you need two result sets, you must create two different statement objects and execute the queries in two different statements so that each statement has one result set and you can work with both of these result sets. Now let's look at working with a result set. When do we get a result set? When we use execute query. You use execute query for select statements. When you use a select statement, you can get multiple rows. So the result of select statement is returned as a result set. To move from one row to another row, the result set has a method called next. So take the result set object, call next. It moves from one row to another row. But initially, please note that the pointer for the result set is just before the first record. It's not at the first record. So the first thing that you need to do is call next. So you move to the first record. Next will return a boolean value true or false, saying whether there are any more records to be processed. By default, the result set processing is in a forward direction. Once you move from one record to another record, you cannot go back to some record previously processed. JDBC 2.0 has introduced to use a result set or to traverse through a result set either in a forward direction or reverse direction, as well as forward and reverse in any direction. So we'll look at those factors little later. But right now let's look at the result set methods. So using next, we can move from one row to another row. Now you need to fetch the column details. To fetch each of the column details, you specify the get methods. Get x of string or get x of int. What does this mean? This x stands for the data type of the column. So you need to know which columns you have extracted and what is the data type of each of those columns. So you have get string, get int, get double, get clob, get blob, get object. All the sorts of methods are supported out here for each of the data types of a database. So depending on the data type, change this x out here. The string is nothing but the name of the column according to your statement, because in your statement you might have mentioned alias name for the column. So you have to specify whatever the name according to your statement, not according to your database. Unless your statement and database is same, it ends up being the same out here. Or you can use index. Index starts with 1 always for JDBC. So you can say get string of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, so on and so forth. It's not a good idea to use index in your programming. You should always make use of your column names. Because if suppose your statement has to change to add additional columns or to remove columns, then your indexing goes for a toss. But when you were to use the column name, you are safe, whether to add more columns or to remove columns from your query. So this is how you fetch your column values. Of course, getString method can be used for any data type. You have a get metadata here. It returns a result set metadata object. Get metadata returns result set metadata. What do you mean by a metadata? A metadata is nothing but an information about an information. So here, this is the information about your result set. Since you are calling get metadata on a result set, it's an information about your result set. So what type of information does it give you? You want to find out how many columns you retrieved? That is get column count. It's available from result set metadata. You don't know what is the data type of a column? You can find out by saying get column type from result set metadata. You can find out the name of the column. Get column label. So all this is nothing but information about your result set coming from result set metadata. Now, as we mentioned, result set can be used with any direction, and result set also in JDBC 2.0 has changed in a sense that you can modify the contents of a result set. It is updatable. So, JDBC 2.0 has enhanced your result set to give you various options. And for those, there are methods available again in the result set. That is, you have the previous method to move backwards in a result set. You can call an absolute method of int, saying that from the current position, wherever my result set is, I want to move across so many records. You have first, last, before first, after last. These are some of the methods to move to the first record, to the last record, or to move the result set pointer just before the first record or after the last record. We do have methods to manipulate the result set, because result sets are updatable, provided that you have mentioned that you want to update. Otherwise, by default, they are read-only. So if you want to update a result set, you have an update method, update x of column name, comma value, or it could be a column name or column index, comma the value. This x stands for the data type of the column. So it could be update string, update int, update long, update club, whatever the method, the data type of a column is. So either you can specify column name or column index and provide the appropriate value. So if it is update string, the value should be string. This parameter is always a string or an int, depending on whether it's a name or an index. but the value really depends on the data type of this particular update method. So once you have updated a particular column, you would want to reflect that into a database, update that into a database. So you have a method called update row, which will commit the change to a database. Suppose you made a change using the update statement onto the columns of a result set and you want to undo it. You can undo the changes before the update row is called. If the update row is called, the changes are already reflected. You cannot do anything more. You cannot undo it. So before the update row, if you want to undo it, you say cancel update row. So it will undo the changes and get you back to the original state. We also have delete row to delete a current row. We can also insert new rows into a result set and update that to the database. To insert new rows, first thing is, in the result set they have provided one row which is called as a staging area. You need to move to that staging area and then update each of the columns and call for insert row. So to accomplish this, what you need to do is, you need to say move to insert row, so it moves the pointer, result set pointer to the staging area. Then you, as usual, call the update methods on each of the columns. Once you are done, call the insert row method so that it inserts the row to the database table. It commits it. So update row, delete row and insert row are permanent changes to the database. It's a commit to the database. Once you are done inserting a row, you would want to move back to the row where you were before you moved into the staging area. So how do you move back to wherever you were previously? So for that you have move to current row. Now one thing that happens with a result set is that at a time, suppose you gave a select statement and it retrieved 1000 records. All 1000 records will not be available in the result set. The number of records that will be returned to the result set at a time depends on the fetch row. By default, the fetch row is set in Oracle to 10. You can change the fetch row by saying set fetch size of int. So you can specify at a time how many records you want into a result set. Remember, do not make the size too huge also, because that's also going to cost you on performance. It should not be very small also. Either way it costs on performance. 10 is the ideal thing, that is what they have set. So what happens is, depending on what is the fetch size, if the fetch size is 10, at a time it gives you 10 records into the result set. So once I process the 10 records, then I go back to the database, fetch the next 10 records. So there is a lot of network traffic back and forth to the database. If you want, you can specify using set max rows, saying how many rows maximum you want to get overall. Although 1000 records were retrieved, maybe you just want the 100 records. So you can say set max rows to 100. So what is the solution for this particular network traffic? Because using a result set, the connection not only has to be opened, although I have already finished my execution of my statement, okay, but I also have a network traffic. In JDBC 3.0, they introduced what is known as a row set. So there is javax.sql package which contains the row set interface. Row set is derived from result set. Now when you use row set, you need not be connected to the database. You can close the database connection and still be able to access the results, because all the data would have been brought to the client end. And cache row sets have been introduced with JDBC 4.0, which does caching. It's derived from a row set. So when you have huge amount of information to be processed, and you wouldn't actually want to hold the connection because there's so many users accessing, if you hold the connection for a long period of time till you process the entire results, there would be very limited connections available then to process for other clients. So then you must use row set or cache row set rather than making use of a result set. In real-time coding, you will not hold connection objects for a long time. You will get the connection, you will process the get the results at the client side, close all the connections, then you process the result set. So you must use row set or cache row sets rather than a result set. Not only it reduces the network traffic, but you don't have to keep the connection as well. Result sets is not a good idea to pass result sets as return types of a method or as parameters to a method, because if suppose I have passed the result set as a parameter to some method, and in another thread I close the connection or a statement, the result set automatically gets closed. In JDBC, it is always a dynamic commit. That is, as soon as you execute the statement, it commits the statement execution. If you said insert, automatically it commits the insert statement to the database. If you don't want an automatic commit to happen, then in the connection interface, there is a method called set auto commit of Boolean. So set this auto commit to false so that your statements are not automatically committed, in which case you have to explicitly commit or roll back your transactions by calling the commit or rollback methods from the connection interface. In JDBC 2.0, save points have also been introduced. So you can set the save points and then roll back to the save point if required. JDBC 2.0 has also introduced cursors. The connection interface also has method get metadata. The get metadata of a connection interface returns database metadata. This is the return type of get metadata. Now what does database metadata gives you information? It gives you information about your connection. Like what is the driver that you are using, how many tables are available, what are the tables available, what is the transaction isolation level being used, so on and so forth. Now what is this transaction isolation level that we just mentioned? In the connection interface again, we have a method called set transaction isolation of int. What we mean by transaction isolation is that it tells us whether dirty reads possible, phantom reads is possible, and non-repeatable reads are possible or not. Now what do we mean by all this? Dirty read means when one is changing the data, another person, if he were to read the data, he can see the changes although the commit has not happened to the database. That is dirty read. Non-repeatable read means, let's say I have read a set of records once, and again if I were to read the same set of records, there is a change in my information. That's because someone can come and make changes to the set of rows which I have read. So if I want to lock the rows that I have read, the non-repeatable read should not happen. Phantom read is, I have read certain number of records and someone has come and inserted another new record. That is a phantom read. So if I want to disallow all this to happen, we need to specify the transaction isolation level. Now of course, this should be taken care more at the database end than in our code. So database has its own locks that they set for all these purposes. But if we want to set it through our code out here, so what is the isolation levels that we need to specify? In the connection interface, we have the static final int variables for all this, that is transaction underscore none. Of course, all this has to be in capital because they are static final variables. Transaction underscore read underscore uncommitted. Transaction underscore read underscore committed. Sorry, transaction underscore repeatable underscore read. And transaction underscore serializable. What these mean is, when you say transaction underscore none, there is no transaction. Transaction underscore read underscore uncommitted, all the three occurs, that is dirty read, phantom read, and non-repeatable read occurs. Transaction underscore read underscore committed means the dirty read does not occur, but the non-repeatable read and the phantom read occurs with transaction underscore read underscore committed. Transaction underscore repeatable underscore read, the dirty read and the non-repeatable read will not occur, but the phantom read occurs. Whereas with transaction underscore serializable, none of the three occurs. But using transaction underscore serializable is a performance issue because it locks for everything and the concurrency cannot occur. Now coming back here to the result set, we said we can update the result set, we can move through the result set in any direction. To specify in which direction I want to move through the result set, we have a method called setFetchDirection. Which takes an int value, that is how you want to move through a result set. There are constants in the result set interface, they are called fetch forward, fetch reverse, and fetch unknown. So if you, by default it is fetch forward, which means you can only move through the result set in a forward direction. Fetch reverse means move through the result set only in the reverse direction. And fetch unknown means you can move through the result set either of the ways. In order for this to work, in JDBC 2.0, the statement functions have been modified, have been overloaded. That is, while creating your statement objects, you need to specify two things, the type and concurrency. That is, first parameter would be the type and the second parameter would be the concurrency in case of create statement. In prepare statement, the second and third parameters are type and concurrency. Similarly with prepare call. So, type and concurrency, what does it say? It basically says how I want to use my result set and whether that result set is updatable or not. So, the types that are available are type underscore type underscore forward only, type underscore sensitive, and type underscore insensitive. And for concurrency, it is concur, read only, and concur, updatable. So by default, type forward only is the value for type, and type concur read only is the concurrency value. So in the result set you can find out get concurrency and get type tells you these values in the result set interface. Type forward only means even if you set your fetch direction to unknown or reverse, it will, and the type is forward only, you get an exception, SQL exception. So you must set to type sensitive or insensitive if you want to apply your fetch direction to either previous or unknown. Type sensitive means your result set is sensitive to, your data is sensitive to others' changes. Insensitive means if others are changing the data, your data is not reflecting the changes which the others are making. Of course, concur read only means that the result set is treated as read only result set, you cannot update or insert or delete, whereas concur updatable means you can insert rows, you can update rows and you can delete rows in your result set. These are some of the features of JDBC. We will now look at a very simple example of JDBC to work with. So till now we have looked at in JDBC the different types of drivers, and we have spoken about the connection, the statements, the different types of statements, and what are the differences between these statements. We have also spoken about the result set when we do an execute query for a select statement. And we have specified what are the enhancements that have been made in 2.0 JDBC for the result set, as well as we also captured that in 3.0 of JDBC, the row set, and in 4.0 JDBC, the cache row set which has been introduced. So now let's look at a simple example on JDBC. and then we will move on to the execute update and the execute methods. Let us write a simple example which just connects to a database, gives a query to select details from an employee table and displays those column details. So public class now, in order to work with JDBC, as we said, we need to import java.sql.star. Now, since the methods that we invoke for JDBC throws SQL exception, we need to have them in a try-catch block. The first thing that we need to do is load the driver class. Let's say we're going to use a JDBC ODBC driver. Now this JDBC ODBC driver class comes with your JDK kit itself. So once you have loaded the driver, next step is to get the connection. So that is driver manager dot get connection. Here you specify the URL, username and password. So the main protocol is JDBC. Sub-protocol is ODBC, followed by the DSN name, let's call it as my DSN, then the username and password. This returns a connection object. Now, although that in this example that we are writing each and every step in terms of what I'm saying is getting the connection and further with the rest of the sequence in JDBC. In your actual work, when you work on your projects, like you have to write a generic method for your connection object, and in every method you have to fetch the connection and close the connection. Do not leave the connection open across methods. It's for a better usage of your connection objects. So driver manager.getConnection returns your connection object. Then using the connection object, we will call for a create statement method which returns a statement object. Next, using the statement object, you call for execute query. Here you pass a string, because remember we are using a create statement method. You have to pass the query string to your execute method. So for the execute query, you pass your SQL string. That is select, let's say emp name, emp number, salary from employee. This will return a result set object. Again, just to remind you, please note that within one statement you can only have one result set open at any point. So once you got a result set, you need to process the result set. Now how do you move from one row to another row. Remember that initially the result set pointer is before the first record. So you need to move to the first record the pointer. So that is to move from one position to another position, you use the next method. And also by default, the type is forward only, concurrency is read only, and result set access, therefore the direction is forward only. So we have while rs.next. Here you fetch each of the column contents and display. So let's say SOP of let's say the employee number, rs dot get string of number, whatever you have specified in your statement, the same name you need to use out here when you fetch the data. rs dot get string of name, rs dot get long of sal. So you fetched all the details from each of the columns in a row and displayed it. Then move back to the next record till you reach the end of the result set. Likewise, once you are done, you close all the resources. So you say rs.close, stat.close, and con.close. End of the try block. So any error that occurs at the database side, you get it as a SQL exception in your JDBC code. So I'm just handling it as a generic exception because even here I could get an error saying class not found exception and various other things. So just handling in a single exception block. Okay. So what happens here, let's look at this. We are closing all the three resources out here, the result set, statement, and the connection. Suppose I don't close the result set, but I close the statement and the connection. When I close the statement, it takes care of closing the result set as well. And suppose I don't close rs and stat, then when I close the connection, it takes care of closing both the result set and the statement. So because of this reason, it's not a good idea to pass these objects across to a method or return it from a method, because in another place you could end up closing the appropriate resource, which would end up closing all the sub resources. So take care of that. So this is a simple JDBC program that we have looked at. Now let's move on to the next part, that is how to execute dynamic SQL statements. Now we talked about prepared statement in which you can specify a dynamic SQL statement, and along with that we will look at execute update as well. So execute update is used to execute your create statement for creating table, okay, delete, insert, update for all these DDL and DML statements. Now what does the DDL or the DML statement return? It returns whether the table was successfully created, so it will say one table created, or it will say how many records were updated. Okay, so therefore the execute update return value is an int value telling you how many records were affected. So let's look at, with the prepared statement, how to execute an update. Let's assume that we call a prepare statement here. Which gives you a prepared statement object. Let's call it as a pstat. Now, instead of execute query, what we will have is execute update, and we will have a dynamic SQL statement specified for it. So, to your prepare statement call, you are supposed to pass the SQL statement, because remember that prepare statement is going to pre-compile your SQL statements. So, update employee set sal is equal to question mark, where department is equal to question mark. So, if this is my statement for update, when we execute, just before we execute it, we need to set the values to these particular fields. So, in order to set the value, depending on the type of the field, the appropriate set methods are available from the statement object. So, what we need to do is, we need to say pstat dot set long of 1 comma the value or the variable which consists of the value. So, let me just provide the value here. That is, what am I actually specifying here? The sequence of the question mark is the sequence of the index. This is index 1 and this is index 2, because the sequence of question mark is the sequence of the index. So, this is index 1 and that is what we are specifying here. So, pstat.set method takes the index comma the value. So, the first index is nothing but salary field, so to which I am setting this particular value. And for the second index, say pstat dot set string of 2 comma the department. So, once you have set the values for the dynamic fields, then you execute it. So, pstat dot execute query, because it is a insert statement. This returns a int value that if you want to capture, then store it in and further use. Let us say I am just going to display how many records were affected. So, this is how you make use of prepare statement to execute a dynamic SQL statement, and that too for any sort of a DDL or a DML statements. And this is the execution of, sorry, this should be execute update, execute update, and this is how you execute the update statement. Now, let us look at how to execute a stored procedure or a function. In order to execute a stored procedure or a function, you need to use a callable statement. So, let us look at the callable statement now. To invoke a stored procedure or a function, the syntax goes like this as a string. So, it is call procedure name, open the bracket, give the list of parameters that you might want to specify, and close the bracket and the quotes. If you want to invoke a function, then it is question mark is equal to call the function name with its parameters. Now why is this difference? Okay, the difference in this syntax is because procedures do not return any values, whereas functions return a value. So for a function, therefore, there is a question mark is equal to and then the function name with its parameters. For procedures, there are no return values, so it's just call procedure name with its parameters. Now the parameters can be in parameters or out parameters as well, or in and out parameters. So what we need to do is, if there is an out parameter and as well for a return value of a function, we have to specify what is the SQL type before executing the procedure or a function. Now there is a types class in the SQL package which has static SQL types specified. So depending on the type of out parameter or the return value of a function, we have to register them as out parameters with specifying the SQL types. So let's see how to do this. Let's assume we have a get quote as a procedure which takes one in parameter and one out and gives one out parameter. So in order to call this procedure, we say call get quote. The two parameters that you're going to pass to this method is one in parameter, one out parameter. So it says two question marks. And the first parameter is going to be actually the stock name. And the second parameter, that's going to be the out parameter, which is the stock value. So what we need to do is, using the connection the statement object rather, use the set method to set the values for these particular parameters. So again, the sequence of the question mark is a sequence of index. So this is index 1, this is index 2. So the first index is a string, so set string of 1 comma the stock name. Let's assume we have a stock name as a variable which consists of a name of a stock. The second parameter, as it is an out parameter, you need to register it with its SQL type, so you can retrieve back in the same data type when you get back the results. So cstat dot register out parameter. The index of the out parameter is 2, so specify that, and let's assume it's going to return a float type of value, so types dot float. Now execute your procedure, so cstat dot execute. Once you execute your procedure, then you can retrieve back the out parameter value. To retrieve back the out parameter value, you say cstat dot get float of 2. Because the second parameter was the out parameter, you need to fetch back that out parameter value as a float since you have registered it as a float and make use of it. If it is a function, then the return value must also be registered likewise, just like you did with the out parameter of a procedure. So this is executing your procedures and functions. Now there is an execute method which we are left to discuss with. The execute method returns a Boolean value, that is true or false. We can make use of this execute method in general also. As well, you can make use of the execute method for multiple results. Now when I say multiple results, it really depends on the database as well. For example, let's say I have a PLSQL block and I have specified set of instructions in a PLSQL block. So the PLSQL block will start with a begin and of course end with the end. In between you will have set of statements, maybe you might have a select statement, an insert, an update, select again, delete, some such statements like this. Now each of the statements that it executes returns with one result. So you got multiple results. Again, as I said, this depends on a database. So in such cases, to process each of the results, it is useful to use the execute method. So if we call for an execute method, for this, let's assume we have a statement object, and then we call execute of this PLSQL block, we get back a Boolean value. So this Boolean, let's call it as a flag. Now what does this execute return? Will it return a true or a false? Depends on what type of a result the first result is. If the first result is a result set, then the return value of execute method is true. That is, if the first result is a result set, that is a select statement, then the return value of execute is true. If the first result is not a result set, that is any other statement apart from select, then the execute method will return false. So once you have true or false, depending on this value, you have to fetch the result set object, or you have to find out how many records were updated. And to do this, we have the get result set method of the statement to fetch the result set object, or get update count, which tells you how many rows were updated. So we go in for a for loop. Loop, let's say till the end of the set of results, right? So let's call one Boolean variable here. Let's call it as more results is equal to true. As long as more results is equal to true, we keep on going through this loop to process each of the results. Now first thing we need to check is if this particular flag is true or false. So if flag is true, then we know that there is a result set. So you need to fetch the result set. So statement dot get result set, this will return a result set object. As usual here, you process through by placing a while loop, rs.next, process the rows in the result set, and that's the end of if. Otherwise, if flag is false, we know that there is a updation, some sort of a DML or DDL statement. So you call for statement dot get update count. This will return you the int value. So let's say int count and say SOP, number of records affected plus CNT. Now this is one of the results. How do you move on to the next result? You need to call for get more results. So we say stat dot, you just write it up here, stat dot get more results. Get more results again returns a Boolean. Let's store that back into flag. We will end our for loop. So in order to move from one result to another next, you need to call for statement.get more results, which will return a Boolean value again, whether true or false. the true value out here again means that you have a result set. The false means you have a DDL statement or a DML statement, or because you have reached the end of the result. It could be either of the case. So, if suppose the flag is true, then again we get the result set, process the result set. If it is false, we come to the else, we do a get update count. So, when we do a get update count for the next result, it will return an int value saying that how many records were inserted. Again we go back and do a get more results. Again, because the next statement is an update, we get a false, so we come to the else and do a get update count as well. Again we do a get more results, because the next result is a result set because of a select. It will return true, so we come here to if flag, execute this result set. Then again we go back here and then call for a get more results. Because it's a delete statement, we get a false, so we come to else, do a get update count, display number of records deleted, and again we do a get more results. It returns false because there are no more results. So therefore we are going to come into else, because it's false, do a get update count. Now it's going to throw a SQL exception at this point. So we need to have this get update count in a try catch block locally here as well. So let's put a try catch of SQL exception, and here we will set more results to false. Now remember that you already have a main try, and within that we have a nested try which is locally specified here. Now when I come out of this particular catch and the else, I would not want to execute get more results again, because already we have set the more results to false. So just before you call for get more results, just make one check. If more results is true, then only call for get more results. Otherwise it's the end of the loop which goes back and checks the more results is no longer true, so I come out of the loop. So this is how you can process multiple results.